Hello, it's St. Paul's Geographers and another video here on the development of countries and how we measure that development. It's going to be a long video and I'm going to get through a lot of content in this one, so if you could please make sure that you watch the whole thing, pause when you need to, do the activities that you need to do when you're pausing the video, and do the quiz at the end of the video. So we're looking at measuring development, and to measure development we need what we call development indicators. Development indicators, we've got two examples here. Those are gross national income, per capita at purchasing power parity, going to go back to that, and human development index, or the HDI. Okay, so these two development indicators are very popular uses of measuring or ways of measuring countries and how they've improved socially and economically over time. So if we were to put over here social development and economic development, those are going to be our ways that we're going to look at how countries have improved. So we're going to launch straight into highlighting some countries here, as well as talking about what these things mean. So GNI, as I've already said, stands for gross national income, and that is the amount of money that people make in a country before tax. Per capita means per person, and purchase power parity, which is a bit of a mouthful, essentially does a few things. It pairs things together, so it pairs currencies all together so that all countries in the world are ranked against the US dollar, which is our measured currency or measurement. It's the figure that we're going to end up with, and it also takes into account the cost of living. So it's using the US dollar, but it's also considering the cost of living in each country. So some countries like Zambia might have a much lower cost of living, but for them they make a lot less money. Okay, so you can see where we want to take that into consideration when we're coming up with this figure. Okay, so the Human Development Index, on the other hand, the HDI, looks at three main things. It does take into account GNI, per capita, at PPP. But a lot of geographers think that this is quite limited, and they want to have another couple of things that they can use to come up with this figure out of 1. So all data is going to be below 1. You can tell that by the numbers that we've got in front of us here. So another thing that they look at is education, and there's two ways that they come up with the education figure that goes into the Human Development Index figure, and that's the education index, which is years in schooling, as well as attainment, the amount of learning attained by students, and there's also literacy rate. So there's a lot, which is a percentage out of 100. So a lot of ways to look at how people are educated, and it's nice to have a balance between having those two figures that go into the HDI. And finally, we have life expectancy, and that can help us understand how healthy people are, how long they're going to live. So that's going to be measured in years. So we've got our three forms of looking at human development, mixing these three together and coming up with a number out of 1, and ranking countries based on that number. So you can see that Norway is the highest in that regard. Okay, now I've got a scatter graph here, and we're going to be filling in 4 countries based on these two figures, and we're going to see if there's a positive or negative correlation between the two, or if there's no correlation, in which case they're not really linked. It's a little bit difficult with just having 4, but we're going to give it a go. And I'm going to highlight in green our GNI per capita countries. We're going to be looking at Singapore, which is number 3 in GNI. We're going to look at Norway, number 4 in GNI in the world. Switzerland, which is number 7, and the USA, which is number 8. Now I want you to pause the video at the moment, and I want you to decide why I've chosen those 4 countries. Okay. Now if you've unpaused the video, you will have of course figured out that Norway is also in these 10 countries, as is Switzerland, as is the USA, and finally Singapore. These are the 4 countries that are in both top 10s for these 2 ways of looking at how countries have improved. We're going to plot them on the scatter graph now, so we're going to start with the GNI and then go to the HDI figures for each country. We're going to give them a key. So we're going to do a green star for Singapore, a red star for Norway. We're going to do a green circle for Switzerland, and we're going to do a red circle for the USA. So starting with GNI for Singapore, it's ranked number 3. But in the world for HDI, it's ranked number 9. So it's going to be plotted as a green star over here. That's Singapore. Norway is going to be number 4 on GNI, and it's going to be number 1 in HDI. So we're going to give that a red star. Switzerland is located number 7 on the GNI per capita, and over here on the HDI, Switzerland is number 3. So a green star here for Switzerland, and then our red star, our USA one, we're going to give rank 8 in the world for GNI, gross national income, and then the USA is number 5 in the world for HDI. So our red circle is going to go over here. Okay, now to draw a line of best fit is going to help us see if there's a correlation between the figures. What we want to do is make sure that there's a split between each side of the figures. We want to make sure that we've got four categories, 4 countries, 4 variables. We want to make sure that we split them in almost perfectly in half, but we need to stay on the lines. So we're actually going to basically draw a line from 10 to 10. And we can see more or less that we've got 2 on either side, and that's one way to draw our line of best fit. Now, we want to decide, is there kind of a pattern here? So for example, the countries that have a GNI per capita ranked 7th and 8th in the world, they're kind of here in the middle. Whereas the countries that are ranked first and third and fourth in the world for GNI, they're actually completely on the opposite ends of the scale. Norway is number 1, while number 9 out of the 10 countries that we have is Singapore for HDI. So it doesn't really seem like there's a guaranteed link between GNI per capita and how well developed a country is. We can actually see that even though Singapore has more money than Norway, Norway is well above Singapore in the HDI. Okay, so it's beating it, it's developed more in these categories overall than just looking at the income that they have. Okay, whereas we would say Singapore tend to be a richer country because they're about $10,000 better off average per person. Okay, so that's how we draw a scatter graph, and that is how we draw a line of best fit and how we decide if there's a correlation between the 2 characteristics. There doesn't really seem to be a correlation, but you need to be able to argue why. Okay, so that's what we've done. Now, I did say there was a lot of content in this video. Okay, and we're going to now look at the Human Development Index around the world. So we've seen what goes into it, and we'll probably be referencing some of the things that help us to understand why they have that Human Development Index category or ranking or number out of 1. So we're remembering that these are out of 1. Okay, so we've got 2 colored sections on the graph or on the map. For the Human Development Index, our key is telling us that green countries have a very high HDI, which means they're very well developed. Okay, and in many cases these countries have continuously gotten better in terms of their HDI over time. The low HDI countries, those are the ones that are developing much slower, as well as just generally having quite a lot of challenges in the country, making things a little bit more difficult for them to develop. Okay, now again we're going to be looking at a couple of examples and how they've changed over time. So we're going to start with the number 1 on the HDI. which is Norway. We can see that the green countries, such as Norway, most of them are in the northern hemisphere. So we can already kind of tell that there's a pattern between the divide between the countries in green, which have a very high HDI, and the countries in orange, which have a very low HDI. Most of the orange countries are below the northern hemisphere, in the southern hemisphere, below the equator. Most of them are actually concentrated in Africa, whereas most countries with a very high HDI are concentrated in North America and Europe. And then there's some outliers around here. We've got your likes of Argentina, you've got Saudi Arabia, Australia, Japan, which is kind of very close to the equator, but in the northern hemisphere. Okay, so we're going to look at our 4 countries that we took, and maybe one more if we have time for it at the end. We're going to start with Norway. Now, Norway's HDI was in 1990 0.772, and in 2019 it went up to 0.93. That's a huge increase. So we can see that Norway has vastly developed in 29 years. Hugely to do with the fact that its education, for example, people are very well educated. They have a very high literacy rate, which is 100%. It's actually not even measured on the literacy rate scale, because they're one of the only countries in the world that has 100% literacy. Put that as like a little cap here. And their average life expectancy is 82.76. So you can see, in terms of, they are a really well developed country. They're located in the northern hemisphere. They have good access to continental Europe, and they've got access to the Atlantic Ocean to get to America for trade. They can also access Asia, very close to it, for trade, and they have a lot of natural resources as well. They have quite a low population density, which is probably one of the reasons why it's really easy to take care of their population. So Norway was one of our highest ranked country. We're now going to look at one of the lower ranked countries in the world, and that's going to be Zambia. And Zambia has, in 1990, 0.365 HDI, okay? And then in 2019 it has developed quite significantly to 0.557, but you can see that that number is still quite low for Zambia, which is one of the main case studies that we look at in the Dynamic Development Unit. So we want to know why that is. Well, they have a very, very low literacy rate, which is 53%. Okay? They've got a GNI per capita of $3,360, taking into account the cost of living. That's really low per person. And remember, that is at PPP. And another thing is that their life expectancy is 65.51 years. That's really low compared to Norway, which is, you're expected to live almost 20 years longer in Norway compared to Zambia. So we're starting to get a picture of why these countries are the way they are. They have such a low life expectancy, possibly to do with the climate, as well as being a landlocked country in a very low developed country, Africa, having been colonized by Britain and affected by their independence in 1964 quite significantly since then, having problems with kind of up and down prices of copper. So we know that, we will know that when we get to the Zambia unit, and that will start to make a little bit more sense. But the fact that they have very low literacy means that they're not going to be able to earn as much money. So you can make links between these two things. So essentially that's how we're looking at things. That's how we are measuring the development of countries over time, how they're well developed, why they're well developed, and where in the country they're going to be likely to be located, if they have a high HDI or a low HDI. Okay, so good luck with the quiz, and we'll see how everybody gets on in the lesson, having watched this video and taking notes on it.